The bigger point here then is that we need less groupthink, more uncomfortable conversations.
Well, I think that the idea that the contrarians in Bitcoin have sort of been kind of marginalized to the extent that they have, I think is a bit alarming.
It totally happens.
Yeah.
Like, we've witnessed it. I've witnessed it on other people. If you step out of what is the general consensus of ideas relating to Bitcoin, altcoins, governance, politics, major global issues.
Right, but there are contradictions here that just seem really large to me, right? So a good example would be like, if you think Tether is a humanitarian tool, but it's built on a shitcoin network, then how do those two things, in your mind, how do those two ideas actually coexist? Because you're admitting that something has value and you're totally discrediting the thing that enables it. So there's a lot of these examples where if you actually drill down into the specifics, you start to just find kind of holes that really don't make any sense, just inconsistencies, right? And I think that we just don't press on those enough, and some of them just, the shitcoin one being probably the biggest one, right? I think I have my own definition of that and why that is the case, but why we use the word shitcoin. But again, I don't think again, it's the modern Bitcoin maximalism is very much a binary construct, right? Bitcoin is the only decentralized cryptocurrency because it has a finite money supply and a fixed monetary policy. That is the definition, I think, of what a lot of people think decentralization is. The problem with that is the developers totally reject that definition. That is not a reasonable definition of decentralization because you cannot apply that definition to other networking technologies. The internet is clearly decentralized, but it is not decentralized because it has a monetary policy. The internet has nothing to do with that. So I think, this is kind of the thing where, ideas and narratives can actually shape assumptions, and those assumptions can seep down into how we're building, right? And how we think about building. And this is the thing that I'm watching right now, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, that's really interesting. You have this creation of this idea that decentralization means this, and clearly it can't mean that. Like, clearly that can't be the actual definition because it doesn't actually apply to anything else. But it's useful because we want to discredit all these other systems. We want to discredit them, and so it fits that binary, right? I think one of the things about early Bitcoin maximalism is that it was technically correct in how it described decentralization, but it was very difficult for people to understand. So it didn't scale well socially. Modern Bitcoin maximalism has scaled very well socially because it takes a very binary construct. If you're not Bitcoin, it's not decentralized, and it's a shitcoin. It's very easy for people to understand. But in actuality, the developers who are working on Bitcoin, they do agree that decentralization is a spectrum. Though there are people working on alternative cryptocurrencies who do say that, there are Bitcoin developers who will admit that. Because in order to build things on top of Bitcoin, you need to build things that will be less decentralized.
Well, within the developer community, within Bitcoin, I am yet to meet a hardened Bitcoin maximalist. Those people who are working on Bitcoin Core. I mean, I'm sure they exist. But actually, you get some of the broader, more challenging conversations with them, the more open-minded conversations, the understanding, appreciation of other cryptocurrencies. What are they doing? What can we learn from it? I tweeted this thing recently. I can't remember what the exact words were, but like, how did we get to this place now where because Bitcoin maximalism isn't just monetary maximalism or platform maximalism. It's also got political, dietary, all of these other forms of maximalism.
Right, yeah.
And it's become a place whereby if you step out of that, you can be attacked. And I know this happens because so many people email me and say, just want to discuss it here. I'm not going to put it on Twitter because they're fed up of being shouted at, memed, insulted, abused. And like other people go, oh, it's just people being mean on Twitter. Yeah, it's fine. We can all toughen up. It's still not fun. And in a cohort which celebrates liberty, censorship resistance, freedoms, to have such a cohort of groupthink that will try and destroy opinions that step outside of that, that's a contradiction. We should be celebrating open discussions.
Well, I think American HODL's answer to that to me is that essentially, like, if you consider Bitcoin's main invention to be scarcity, because it is open source, it immediately was uninvented. Like, because you could essentially just copy Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin both invented something and uninvented it. And one of the only ways that we've found to actually enforce the scarcity of Bitcoin is through this social consensus.
But that hasn't worked. That hasn't happened.
I think it's been a lot more successful than you think. Yeah.
Honestly, we have more shitcoins than ever. We have more altcoins than ever. We have a reducing dominance, and nobody has ever changed their mind from being shouted at. It's like having children. You learn very quickly shouting and yelling at your children does fuck all. It just doesn't work. The best way to parent is to lead by example, to show them, to give them skills and the ability to learn from their mistakes. I've got 2 kids. I still do it sometimes. I lose my shit and I shout at them. Never works. I don't think anyone in the history, or a very small amount in the history of Bitcoin, have been shouted at about altcoins. And again, you know what, you shouted at me, you're right.
Just a funny example, though, just to talk about information disparities. There are some altcoin communities that are larger Bitcoin holders than Michael Saylor and are far less celebrated. So I don't know. I mean, again, these are things that I think we should question a bit more. But again, trying to go back to this general thesis, I think that, Bitcoin really only needs to strive to some amount of economic viability. That's the one thing that we absolutely need above anything else. And I think the question then is, do these ideas and narratives help us get towards that? If they do, I think they're valuable. And then if they are moving us away from that, then I think they are less valuable. I think that would be how I would try to make a weighted judgment between these views.
What about a different way of looking at it? Is Bitcoin maximalism itself fundamentally dead, or should it actually be called off? Is it even useful anymore?
Well, again, I think that you have to look at it through what the utility is, right? So today, the main differentiator between Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies is the monetary policy, right? And the finite supply, and the fact that you, as a minority user within Bitcoin, are protected at a higher degree. So I think those are kind of the real 3 differences, right? And I think that rather than like making a strong arguments around those things and advancing and explaining those things, like that to me is useful, right? That is why I still consider myself in the Bitcoin maximalist camp, because I think it's worthwhile advancing those arguments and for us to continue to advance them. But I think too often we fall back on, again, the sort of idea where, we need to be verbally dismissive or to be angry at people, right? For a good example would be one of the things that started me down this whole train of like trying to write this article was the defection of Udi Werthermeier, who I think has leveled a lot of criticism. He's articulated his criticism very poorly, like I think in public.
He didn't used to. I think there's been like a yield curve on it. Mm-hmm. We talked about this, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. With Udi on the show?
No. You and I were discussing and sometimes I wonder with these characters, what's the information we don't know in the background? Have they also made a bunch of money on altcoins and that's flipped their kind of like...
That's such a weird thing. I mean, there's so many people in this space who again, the purity test is...
It's not a purity test. No, you're missing my point here. What I'm saying is Udi was great commentary, really good at challenging like ideas around maximalism and it would make me rethink. What I'm saying is there became a point where I think it went too far and it became, I think there was less thought and less ideas put into it. And what I'm saying is, has he also maybe been trading or made some money on them? And that's twisted his thinking. I think Udi critical of Bitcoin as a Bitcoin maximalist, I think super useful. It was so useful, but something changed at one point, and I'm a big fan of his.
I think some of that changed because of the ridiculous pushback he got as well. I think it was a bit of a fuck you to the...
Maybe.
Well, how I interpret that is essentially, how I've come to understand it is I think Udi was an original Bitcoin maximalist. I think he believed in that Bitcoin maximalism. In order for Bitcoin to succeed and outcompete all these other currencies, you would optimize Bitcoin's platform capabilities. And then by doing that, you would assimilate these other features and these other markets. And I think what Udi saw was an environment where that conversation was no longer happening. And he saw in other alternative cryptocurrencies, those markets were forming. So I think what Udi saw was essentially, hey, I was here in 2016 when we were going to build all these side chains and we were going to take all these features and move it on Bitcoin. And we were going to outcompete these other alternative cryptocurrencies by unlocking Bitcoin's technical features. And I think what he saw is that an environment where no one was willing to discuss that. But I think to be fair, I think that what I was able to do is I don't think that Udi's reaction to that was necessarily right, because I do think that the definitions have changed, and I think they have somewhat improved to some extent, right? So you can kind of look at what Udi said and say, okay, he's correct, right? What we're doing now no longer matches this old definition. But I can't say if that's good or bad. I can only say that it doesn't match that definition. I think he began to think that that was bad, right? Because I think he was relying on a lot of these older assumptions of saying like, okay, we need to bring this fees onto Bitcoin. We need to have fees be a certain level. We need to secure the blockchain in the future. And you guys are crazy. You're not even using this old model that I have in my head. So I'm not going to continue engaging with you, right? So, but I think that there was a legitimate criticism there saying, hey, we used to believe these things. Why are you guys no longer talking about it? He tried to raise that conversation, I don't think in a way that was very clearly verbally expressed. And the response that he found was a market in which that old ideology was no longer appealing to people. And I think that rebuff was kind of what pushed him out.
Okay.
Because to him, that earlier thinking was still valid. Because one of the other things that I'd mention is that this idea of platform maximalism, this idea that in order to become economically viable, blockchains need to behave in a certain way, that is still what the other cryptocurrencies, that is how their economic model. They haven't inherited that. So what I find very interesting here is you kind of have these like two competing economic models. Bitcoin has again charted a very clear course where it's doing something very different than the other cryptocurrencies. And so I can't say whether one is good or bad. All I can say is that Bitcoin originally had this definition of how it was going to succeed. It no longer follows that, but all these other cryptocurrencies do, right? They view themselves as competing for transactions, trying to boost their fee market, and trying to ensure a future where their chains are economically viable. And ultimately, they assume an environment where all blockchains are competing for transactions. Bitcoin now fundamentally rejects that. We no longer believe that Bitcoin has to compete in that way in the market. And that has been a schism that I think, we should ask ourselves why we made that decision. What are the underlying assumptions that led us down that course? Or did we even consciously go down that path? I don't know. Those are questions that I can't really even start to unpack right now.